was on a cold, wet night in November, 58 years ago, that science fiction would change forever. On that fateful Saturday night in 1963, viewers nationwide would be introduced to the mysterious Doctor Who and his time and space machine known as the TARDIS. But little did those viewers, nor producer Verity Lambert, know just how long and successful this quaint show would become, inspiring and entertaining millions, becoming one of the biggest and most iconic sci-fi properties in the world. Now, when it comes to celebrating such a significant show, you have to go above and beyond to mark the occasion. It's a pretty big deal. Previous anniversaries had been marked with multi-Doctor team-up episodes, so the landmark 50th anniversary special in 2013 would be no different. Indeed, Stephen Moffat's Day of the Doctor would continue this tradition, teaming the incumbent 11th Doctor with his predecessor, the immensely popular 10th Doctor. However, despite its popularity, is this cinematic special actually a train wreck indicative of some of Moffat's biggest shortcomings as Doctor Who showrunner? Well, grab your box of sizzling hot takes and take it to the nearest barn, because it's time to take a second look at the Day of the Doctor. The cold open starts with the Doctor snooping around a spaceship, as they often do. I think it's a similar opening to the Doctor, the Widow and the Wardrobe, being thrown into the middle of one of the 11th Doctor's spaceship escapades, with alarms blasting and a high stakes atmosphere. However, then he's confronted by the Cybermen, who are sporting a new design more reminiscent of the Cybersmen, rather than the new design introduced in Nightmare in Silver. This is the first indication of the episode's shocking inconsistency. Day of the Doctor aired mere months after Nightmare in Silver, so there's no reason for the change. If anything, it would have been easier to just reuse those Iron Man costumes, as much as I hate them. It's possible that they settled on a familiar costume because the special is for a wider audience, who might not recognise the newer design, but I do feel like it's a baffling change to make when those new ones had only just debuted. However, I do like that the Cybermen are the big bad of the episode here. It would have been too obvious to use the Daleks, who don't really need the rub of being in the spotlight, but the Cybermen have been around almost just as long, yet they always get the short end of the stick. Especially in New Who up to this point, because of episodes like Army of Ghosts and Doomsday. So I would say it's nice to see them given the central focus in such a massive, landmark episode. The Daleks are played out, and the Moffat era never really did much with them. Episodes like Victory and Asylum being massive stinkers, real letdowns, no matter how you slice it. Maybe I'm just being biased because the Cybermen are my favourite monster, but they're the right choice for an anniversary special. They'd even been in Silver Nemesis, although we don't really talk about that one. As usual, the Cybermen plan is to harvest humans, although this time they want bodily fluid rather than conversion, which is an odd, law-breaking route to take. Even the Cybermen still wanted to convert, but here they clearly want to just harvest, and we never really find out why. It's never explained why they're carrying out this plan, which makes the motivations of the villain completely muddled and confusing. However, I would be willing to headcanon their motivations away as being rogue Cybermen, since they have a bit of an argument, one undermining the leadership of the other and making snarky comments, which is a bit reminiscent of the scheming cult of Skaro in Evolution of the Daleks, where they plotted and bitched against Dalek Sec. If you think this sounds very un-Cyberman-like, you'd be completely correct, because the Cybermen's whole deal is to remove individuality and emotion, yet these still have it. This would lead me to believe these may only be partially converted Cybermen, like Lisa in Torture with Cyberwoman. They're almost fully converted, but still have enough humanity to cause these kinds of outbursts and arguments. Shockingly, it turns out that the monsters have already infiltrated Earth thanks to the Doctor himself, which is a massive bombshell to lead into the title sequence. This is huge, explaining the mysterious incarnation we were introduced to in Name of the Doctor. Was this man corrupted by the Cybermen and that's why he's been scrubbed from the Doctor's timeline? It's a fantastic way to continue that cliffhanger, finding out he has essentially engineered Earth's own destruction by allowing one of his biggest enemies to penetrate the world, going against all his morals and code of honour. It's a brilliant premise for a multi-Doctor story, so it means the cold open is a very successful one.
The Doctor helped you, but I'm the Doctor.
After the brand new title sequence created especially for the episode, we get a flashback to 3 days earlier, throwing the audience backwards in the timeline to explore the build-up to that massive cold open. Strangely enough, Amy and Rory are there, which is again a confusing decision, as basically everyone knows by now the couple had been zapped back in time at the end of Angels Take Manhattan, so it's a significant shock to see them here. However, knowing the Doctor, especially the 11th Doctor, it's entirely possible he pops back into their timeline here and there for innocent escapades, especially because Series 6 had them start off with an older version, just to continue on with the younger, and Rory's outfit further suggests they're in the middle of Series 6. I do think this direction is a shame though, because it cheapens that earlier ending for the duo. We were led to believe the Doctor could never ever see them again, but now he can just show up whenever. Amy reveals that she's become a kissogram again, and, well, it's implied she's a few steps further along than that, which Rory rightfully objects to because he wasn't consulted. I know this is just Moffat being, well, Moffat, writing with one hand on his keyboard whenever a woman is in the script, but it's moments like these exemplify why I really hate Amy. She walks all over Rory and doesn't treat him with any respect. Even though they need money, she still didn't clear this with him before. That's not exactly a sign of a healthy relationship because he isn't consenting. This is the first time he's ever hearing of it. And again, because it's Moffat, all the attention is drawn to the idea of Rory's masculinity being threatened by this, even though, you know, he just doesn't want his wife bonking other men, which isn't exactly a bad stance to take. However, I do like that Rory brings up how being a male nurse and all that entails means he's not really got a fragile sense of masculinity to begin with, so it's a good mention of his background. Because he wants to find other ways to raise the cash, Rory offers to sell his DVDs, including his precious copy of Shercock. This is a great little reference to Moffat's other big show at the time, the modern adaptation of Arthur Conan Doyle's classic series, Shercock Bones, featuring popular British actor Benedict Cumberbatch. Hype for Shercock was very high, making it an international phenomenon. A lot of people were heavily invested in both of Moffat's shows, even creating the joint fandom name of Whocock, so this is an incredibly bold reference for fans of both shows. It's a bit fan-wanky and not at all subtle, especially because it confirms Shercock is canon in the Doctor universe, despite having many actors crossing over, but then again there are only about 12 actors in Britain, so you'd face that problem with pretty much anything. I mean, hell, Doctor Who itself might be canon in the show because of an implication in Remembrance of the Daleks, and also Call the Midwife existing, which itself referenced the Aztecs, so it all gets a bit messy, as Doctor Who often does. And it also therefore means Stephen Moffat himself is also canon, which the more I think about it is definitely why he put this line in, as we all know how much he loves himself. However, the whole DVD selling kissogram angle is quickly lost to the void, as the couple go off to bonk because, of course, you know, Moffat's one hand and all. I mean, that's almost like writing an entire minisode about the TARDIS almost being destroyed because Rory looked up Amy's skirt. But surely he'd never write anything like that, right? After a gratuitous post-coital shot of Amy undressed, the Doctor slips in as he often does. We all know how bad the 11th Doctor's timing is, as shown in shorts like Pond Life, where he walked in on them in bed. This scene really does make me wonder where they are in the timeline, because Amy is flirty towards the Doctor, like she was in Series 5, despite it seeming to be much later than that. So again, it's some weird mix-up of how characters are supposed to act. But I guess anyone who finished exactly at the ending of Flesh and Stone would feel like this was a logical continuation. Much like Pond Life, the Doctor is here to warn the Ponds about a threat to Earth, although this time he gets distracted by his favourite meal, because you have to make sure the audience recognise things. However, I will always question how the hell they managed to get this line past the BBC.
And have you ever noticed how fish fingers and custard are extremely sexual?
I know Moffat loved to ride the line of what's acceptable on a family show, but I'm surprised he was able to clear such a forward sentence. Just after warning them about the Cyberman threat, Amy and Rory re-enter, just to have been converted into the big old stompy metal boys. This is an absolutely massive moment that doesn't seem to be given any gravitas. These are the Doctor's companions, who have just been turned into emotionless Cybermen and effectively killed. But their deaths aren't given any weight, and the Doctor doesn't mourn them at all. It reminds me of Amy's death in Night Terrors, but even that later got reversed. Here, they stay like this forever, and it never gets explained or rectified. It's a gigantic oversight that really downgrades the quality of the episode, because it seems to completely ignore their timeline and events of episodes just half a series before. Instead of them facing the angels and being sent back in time, we're meant to believe they just got converted into Cybermen halfway through Series 6? I know the Moff likes his time travel shenanigans, but this is more than a step too far. It's basically a half marathon. Whilst escaping the Cybermen, the Doctor comes across his old flame, River Dong, waiting for him. This is another example of seemingly just inserting things the audience will know, because she never really has a bearing on the plot. She has one solo scene of exposition, completely unrelated to the episode, and the only real reason for her being there is the surprise return of a beloved character. Because who would ever throw in a pointless cameo to prop up a terrible bare-bones plot, and warn about a future Cyberman threat? River turns out to have journeyed back from the day after the events of the cold open, explaining how it's the Doctor's fault the Cybermen plundered the planet. It also rationalises how the monsters converted Amy and Rory, because they're using the Doctor's timeline to probe all of his former companions, essentially reproducing about 100 different expanded media stories. I think this idea is adequate, but it doesn't make a huge amount of sense because the corrupted previous self of the Doctor wouldn't have known about the ponds, and the Cybermen don't really travel in time themselves. Although I do like this scene for the idea that Cybermen tried using legitimate businesses as a front for their harvesting. It's only mentioned briefly, but it's a fantastic concept to explore, something I would love to see properly fleshed out. Usually they just violate and stomp around, but this is similar to the Invasion, a fake business allowing them to target humans and ravage the world. However, this is quickly passed over with the revelation that the Doctor got a little tipsy and fell into the Cyberman booby trap, allowing them to enact their plan. This is very out of character for the Doctor, who doesn't exactly go out and get sloshed, so it's a weird way to justify the plot and continues that massive mischaracterization. I do appreciate that when they set course for the end of the world, it's not an instant journey as we often see. It's an idea also shown in the TV movie, and I hate that it almost never shows up again. I mean, episodes established TARDIS bedrooms and seats, so surely they had a purpose, since sometimes it should logically take a few minutes to traverse the universe. However, I don't like that Moffat again can't resist implying sexual relations between the Doctor and River. Even outright having River suggests they bonk to give themselves something to do. She was always flirty with him, and things like this were implied, but again, I think it's just too forward here.
Sex, Doctor.
Then the episode gives the audience whiplash as we're jerked back into the 10th Doctor era. He and Rose on a space station watching a planet die, which sounds a bit familiar. I mean, hell, they even call it Platform 1, which is an oddly specific reference to make. This scene feels incredibly vanilla to me. I think you can really tell that both Tennant and Piper have been away from the show for a long time. Not only is Tennant wearing a weird black suit the Doctor never wore, he also looks like he's let himself go a bit. He's a lot chonkier than he ever was as the Doctor, which is ironic, because the 10th Doctor had a reputation for being incredibly skinny. His English accent also seems really off, probably because he'd become so used to only his natural Scottish one once he left the show. I know there's always going to be something iffy about an incarnation returning after they left, since people do grow and change, but this was only 3 years later, so it's incredibly jarring. Billie Piper also looks and sounds a bit off. Rose, for some reason, is taller than the Doctor, and it's immediately obvious that Piper had some facial work, because she looks pretty different how she did, even back in the End of Time Part 2. Usually these kinds of things wouldn't be a deal breaker for me, but there's no explanation for it, and the pair also seem to have lost all chemistry with each other. It's a surreal scene because Tennant is one of the most charismatic actors in the show's history, and can make an interaction with a cardboard box incredible, but here there's absolutely nothing. Both of them are so rigid and wooden for some reason, and it really makes you wonder what the point of bringing them back was if they erect this shocking of a performance in such a short, simple scene.
Thank you, Doctor.
You're welcome, Rose.
In one of the weirdest surprise cameos the show has ever seen, a Vervoid actually shows up to greet the duo, which is an incredible deep cut because pretty much nobody in the audience would have any idea what a Vervoid is, especially not some 10-year-old kid who doesn't even know Classic Who exists. The Vervoids first appeared in Trial of a Time Lord, one of the most derided seasons of Classic Who, in a story infamously blasted by future showrunner Chris Chibnall. Obviously, Moffat was a massive Classic Who fan, having grown up with it, but I feel like the use of the Vervoids is too deep of a cut for the audience to understand, especially after refusing to use the latest Cyberman design out of a desire for similarity. Why change that design but bring back the Vervoids out of all the possible monsters? It's mind-boggling. As good as it is to see an obscure monster return, it's the only thing that actually makes this the 50th anniversary special, since it's the only hookup to Classic Who in the entire episode. But seriously, why a Vervoid and not, say, a Zygon or something? I just find it so hard to wrap my head around this decision.
Now, Rose.
After the Vervoid's home planet convulses and explodes, the duo reflect on it being sort of romantic, implying they're ready to jiggy right then and there. Now, this is probably the most fan-wanky and controversial moment in the special. Ever since Doomsday, there has been a raging debate regarding the relationship between the 10th Doctor and Rose, with many shippers calling them 10 Rose and lots of fans hating every single aspect about that. Despite them being just friends in Series 1, as soon as Series 2 rolls around and the Doctor regenerates, the pair suddenly becomes seemingly romantic, especially with how they react to losing each other. Rose telling him that she loves him and later the Metacrisis Doctor reciprocating those feelings in Journey's End. It's undeniable that Davies intended them to have a romance, but part of the perceived tragedy of Doomsday was the splitting of them before they could actually consummate. However, now that Moffat is in charge and gets to revisit them during their main time together, he takes the bold step of implying they were always getting down during Series 2. I really don't like that, because not only does it canonise 10 Rose fully, it also means their separation is almost less tragic, because it takes away the idea of them never being together. To be honest, I hate the pairing in general, so that's probably why I don't like this scene, but I just think it's a very insulting and fan-wanky thing to do.
Oh, really?
We then catch up to the cold open, still not really any clearer as to what's going on. The Doctor unsuccessfully tries to talk the Cybermen out of their invasion, just to see a captive Martha caught by the monsters just like Amy and Rory were. I think this means there are some nice stakes here because we already know what the villains are capable of, how much of a threat they pose, so you know Martha is in danger here. However, in the nick of time she's saved by our old friend Captain Jack Harkness, who's here too because of course he is. Much like River, it's so shoehorned in and impotent. Why would anyone think it's a good idea to bring Captain Jack back against a big bad iconic villain when he barely does anything and only really appears to keep the audience interested in a bad episode? Then, right at the end of the special, it suddenly becomes the multi-Doctor story we were promised, as the 10th Doctor shuts down the Cybermen and intertwines with his successor in a triumphant moment of ecstasy. It's always fun to see multiple Doctors, but I feel like I could only get behind this if the 10th Doctor had more of a presence throughout. He has such a short, singular scene that doesn't really feel justified when he comes back to help save the day. It also turns out that Moffat really wasn't joking to curse the fatal death after all, because they literally saved the day by travelling back in time before the Cybermen travelled back in time, flipping a massive Uno reverse card and corrupting the Cybermen instead of the Doctor. I hate this climax a lot, because it's convoluted and not at all earned. It's all off screen and gets explained away by exposition. It doesn't feel like some big plan that's paying off. It just feels like a rushed and disappointing premature money shot. Who would end an episode like this? Who would end a big story with returning foes and twist galore with such a terrible off-screen ending that comes out of nowhere? However, the pair haven't truly saved the day, as we find out when the 10th Doctor is fatally shot by a Cyberman. Much like Amy and Rory, this is a completely disgraceful rewriting of established lore. I know a lot of people didn't like End of Time, but this is Moffat completely disregarding the 10th Doctor's regeneration and character arc, just killing him off to prove a point. I guess it shows that he really didn't like how Davies pulled out of the show, since the main criticism of End of Time is how hard it made Moffat's job, as it effectively tried to finish the show for good. I could see this as Moffat getting his revenge, if you will, which is very petty, and I don't know why a writer would craft a whole story just to accommodate the rewriting of established lore to suit their own headcanon. The Cyberman who killed the 10th Doctor then actually becomes the single most deadly Doctor Who villain of all time, since it blasts all over the 11th Doctor during his reunion with Martha and Captain Jack, very similar to the cliffhanger of Stolen Earth, something that pair even reference.
Hang on, didn't you used to have one of his old hands lying around? Because we could use that to bring him back.
This is a really tragic and shocking ending for the 11th Doctor, and I have to give Moffat credit for keeping it under wraps. It was common knowledge that Matt Smith would be leaving the show, but it was supposed to happen at Christmas. It wasn't even rumoured that the Doctor would regenerate in the 50th. So this death comes completely out of the blue, and it's a massive surprise that really shook me when I saw it upon airing. It's so blunt, and I think that adds a lot to the sinking emotion of it. The Doctor had just saved the day and was reunited with two old companions, only to be suddenly struck down like this. It really feels tragic, and you feel Martha's pain at losing her friend like this. Freema Agyeman portrays the emotions so well. Even though they're familiar with regeneration, they know this is the Doctor's last body. He can't change again because he's out of lives now. The lack of music also makes this remarkable, because it just leaves you with your own thoughts and emotions as you try to process this seemingly final death of such a long-lived and celebrated character.
I'm sorry. Let it go. Come on. He's gone. He's gone.
However, much like Curse of Fatal Death, just as the companions have given up all hope, the Doctor comes back against the odds, even regenerating into a woman, meaning Day of the Doctor holds the distinction of introducing the first official female incarnation of the Doctor, a truly landmark achievement and a perfect way to celebrate 50 years, taking the boldest step the show has ever taken, shaking up tradition to carve a new path forward. Although I'm not sure I like how much of a pandering fourth wall break her first words are.
Why would they miss the opportunity to cast a woman or a minority in the role to better reflect?
And ironically, right after trying to take this moral high ground, Moffat can't resist making a joke about the Doctor having boobs, because clearly his brain hasn't changed since 1999.
Emma, look! I've got etheric beam locators!
No, Doctor. I'm afraid those are actual breasts.
Having Eleven regenerate into a woman is nice because it brings his life full circle, after initially believing he was one after regenerating. But I feel like Petra Capaldi's first moments are very messy and tonally off, with some conflicting messages. However, I think she slips into the role well, really pulling off those Doctor-like vibes we love so much. So it's no surprise she's my favourite incarnation so far. The special then ends with 12, Martha and Jack coming together to blast off in the TARDIS, with more adventures to come. This reliance on previous characters has attracted some controversy, but I think it works well in this final scene. It's always been notoriously hard to establish a new incarnation, so a great trick is to have a familiar character help guide the audience through the change so they don't freak out. It was done with Ben and Polly, Sarah and the Brigadier, the season 18 trio, Perry and Rose. This takes that idea and reapplies it, although it also takes the bold step of having companions who didn't even travel with the 11th Doctor. It's kind of like the original plan of bringing Leela back in season 18 to guide the change, although this time they actually pulled the trigger, and I think it went on to establish the 12th Doctor incredibly well, not needing to establish new companions alongside a new, groundbreaking Doctor. A lot of people really love Day of the Doctor and consider it one of the best episodes of modern Doctor Who, but it's a complete dumpster fire I strongly dislike. It's basically everything Doctor Who shouldn't be. The plot is muddled and confused, never paying off big revelations or ideas, almost feeling like a first draft that never got corrected or rewritten. The storyline is so weak that it relies heavily on familiar faces to play on the audience's nostalgia and paper up the cracks, even though those characters serve no actual purpose to the episode. There's also no mention of Clara at all, despite her being the current companion. I know there were some contractual issues and Coleman was the only one to not sign on, but an explanation as to Clara's absence would have been nice. The music is almost non-existent, and the character writing is so abysmally bad. Almost none of the characters act like themselves, they're so wooden and stunted, and the episode plays out more like bad fanfiction than anything else. Fan wankery galore. I do respect Day of the Doctor for introducing the 12th Doctor in such a surprising way, but that's probably the only real upside of the story. Doctor Who never tries too hard to have a continuity, but this episode is a complete insult to any idea of logical storytelling, rearranging timelines and wiping other episodes out of existence for no reason whatsoever. It's by far the worst multi-Doctor story, because it's barely even one. The 10th Doctor does nothing of note, and again, he's just there for nostalgia. I fear it kickstarted a worrying trend that lasts to this day, because they just thrust him in out of desperation to remain relevant because he's the one mainstream audiences know and love. My other main gripe with the episode is that it's not at all a 50th anniversary special. It's basically just an 8th anniversary special of New Who. It almost completely ignores classic Who, skewing far too heavily to the modern era. This would be fine if it was marketed as such, but it was heralded as the ultimate anniversary for such a significant milestone, yet it only has one classic monster in a minor role with no real connection to the story as a whole. Day of the Doctor is a massive letdown to me, and by far Moffat's worst script by a country mile. How this episode managed to get broadcast, I have no idea. I'm just thankful it didn't kill the show with how unapologetically terrible it is. And I'd like to give a very special thank you to my gold level patrons: Alex Marston, Calvin, Daniel Shillito, Franz Horn aka Line Vortex, John, Steph McNever Miller, and William Jewell. Thank you so much for your support.